What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over another episode of the first-person shooter tutorial series. So specifically in today's episode, we're going to be improving our interaction system. So we had the interaction system where if we were within a proximity to an object, we were able to press the E button, or E key, to equip it. Additionally to that, I have added the look at objects to interact with them. So when we were looking at this cube last time, we set this cube as an interactable object, and when we were looking at it, we were printing the name of the object to the screen. In this episode, we're going to be able to actually look at it to bring up a prompt, and when we stop looking at it, we're going to hide the prompt. We will also be able to look at weapons and interact with them, just like we were able to interact with them by being within close proximity. If we look at them, we now will get the option to equip them with the name of the weapon, just like before when we were within their proximity. You can use either method of interaction in your game and in your project, or you can use both. We will be using a mix because I do want to show supporting both if you want one or the other. This episode is going to begin by going over the look at objects to interact with them, and then we'll go into a little bit of the merging. We will have another episode to merge everything together and get them working perfectly in tandem. If you want to get caught up in the series, you can click this playlist right here in the top right corner. That is the first-person shooter tutorial series playlist, so you can see every episode we've done to this point. If you just want to get caught up in the interaction system, I'll link you to the first part of the interaction system right here in the top right corner. That will be useful for today's content, so you're going to want to check that one out before you take a look at this episode. With that out of the way, we can begin. So we are going to want to start in our code today because we're going to take a look at our raycast and our look at to interact system, and we're going to modify it to fit the needs of our game. In the code, I'm going to my FPS tutorial character, and I'm going to scroll down to my tick function. In here, we were setting up all of our logic to draw a line out of the center of the camera for a given distance, and then determine if it collides with an object. If it does, we then check to determine, make sure that there was a blocking hit that we were colliding with, something with blocking collision. We were then calling a function called displayInteractPrompt, and this was just printing the string to the screen with the name of the actor that we were looking at, just to make sure that everything was working as intended. I actually don't need to be doing that anymore because we're going to make it a little bit more elaborate. Instead, we're going to be doing some other logic in here, as well as quite a few other cases that you can see. So let's start off with this. Everything up to this if statement in this function is the same as it was. I haven't changed anything before this if statement. This line right here that I have commented out is the only line we had within this if statement last time, and now I'm going to be getting rid of it because this was just printing a string to make sure that, again, we were looking at an object and the game could tell that we were looking at the object. Once we got that verification, we could then do more with it. I don't actually want to just print a string. I want to do stuff with our HUD and displaying the appropriate message. Get rid of that function call. And additionally, I'm actually going to go into my base interactable actor.h. And I've commented out here, but I'm actually going to remove this function right here that I have highlighted. We don't actually need this here. We're going to do it a different way. We're going to do it the same way we did with our other interactables and our HUD. So that was very useful for us in the last episode, but we no longer need it. So now my base interactable actor is going to look like this. I now have this variable fstring object name. And it's just the name of the object. It's that simple. It's the name of this interactable actor. Remember, this is the base interactable actor. So it could be a door, it could be a lever, a button, it could be many things. And so we want to know what name it is so we know what name to display to the HUD when we're asking the player if they want to interact with it. So call it whatever you see fit. Again, for me, I'm calling it object name, but it could be actor name, item name, whatever you want. Object seems the best for me because it's more generic. I made it uProperty, blueprint read write, and edit anywhere because we are going to be using it in the HUD, which currently is a blueprint, so we are going to need it in the blueprint. Now if we go to the base interactable actor.cpp, and we go to the constructor, I set my first default value in here, which is now the object name, and I've just defaulted to object. You could leave it blank, but if you leave it blank, then nothing will display if you forget to name an object. It might be better to have some blank text in here, if that's what you're going for. Otherwise, you can give it a default name like this. It really is up to you. This is just what's going to print. If you don't override the object, we'll use the object name. Now we can go back to the FPS tutorial character.cpp. And let's talk about this logic first before implementing it, because it can get confusing kind of fast if we're not careful. So in the previous episode, we were just checking to see if the object we were looking at was a base interactable actor, and that was our cube. If we click on this cube right here, it is base interactable BP, which is a child of our base interactable actor code class. And so what would happen is we would look at an object. If we looked at this, we would say, yep, we are looking at an interactable object, and we were good to go. But since we're not using that print string anymore, we actually want to display it to our HUD. We want to set the actor that we could be interacting with, and then we want to trigger a pop-up on the HUD. I'll cover this in a second. Let's go over the other cases here. All of the interactables in the world are going to be base interactable actors, but we could interact with things that I'm not specifying are interactables. And what I mean by that is we could potentially pick up a weapon, a shield, something that may have instances or use cases outside of the interactable actor class. So what I'm doing here is I'm now, if this fails, instead of casting the hitResult.getActor to a base interactable actor, I'm casting it to a base weapon to now determine if we're looking at a weapon. So it is slightly different, right? It's basically the exact same operation, but we're checking for a different result. We're checking to see, are we looking at a weapon instead? If we are, I'm doing the exact same logic here. Okay, right now it's the same logic of setting the interact actor and triggering the pop-up, but they could be different in the future. So I did not just use an or statement here. I do have them as an if and an else if. But if you want them to work exactly the same, you could just use an or statement and combine these together. Now I have an else after this, and this is because if neither of these end up working, then we don't want to show a pop-up. We can't interact with anything. We don't want to tell the player that we can, so I'm just hiding it. Of course, you can add more cases than this. You can keep doing more else ifs if you have more that you want to cast to. But once you reach the else, this is when you're out of objects that you can interact with. We want to set the interact actor to null pointer, which basically just resets it, sets it to nothing. Then I'm calling a function called hide interaction pop-up. So this means that we are looking at an object with a blocking collision, but it's not one that we can interact with, and that's how we get to this point. Now the last case here, this bottom else, is saying if we are looking, but we're not hitting anything with our line trace. So we're just either looking into the air, or we're looking, but we're too far away to actually collide with any blocking object. At this point we go into this else, which does the same logic as the else, the nested else here, where we reset the interact actor, just set it back to null pointer, and then we hide the interaction pop-up. Now that we know logically what's going on here, we have to see how to actually implement this. And to do that, we're going to need to make two new functions: trigger interaction pop-up and hide interaction pop-up. So let's go into our FPS tutorial character.h and scroll down to your functions. And early in the series, we set up a out of ammo pop-up, and we were able to trigger it and hide it from the code. I'm doing the same thing here. So I've made this trigger interaction pop-up and hide interaction pop-up a blueprint implementable event. So we can call it from the code, and we can perform the actual logic within the blueprint, which is where the HUD is. So quick recap on this. Trigger interaction pop-up, it takes in an actor pointer, and that's the object reference. This could be important because you could take the actor's name, you could take the rarity, you could take a lot of these other elements from this actor and somehow change the interaction pop-up if you'd like to. So for example, if you take the object and you take the rarity, you could maybe change the color of the text of the object on the interaction pop-up. Alternatively, you could just use the object name to change it. You don't have to pass the entire actor. You could pass just the name if that's all you care about. But passing in the actor or passing in a few parameters from the actor might give you a little bit more freedom with what you're able to show to the player when they're going to interact with an object. Like I said, I made it a ufunction blueprint implementable event, and I gave it a category of HUD. Making it a blueprint implementable event means that we do not change any of the logic or set up any of the logic in the code. We can call it in the code, but we set this up in the blueprint. Now, I also have this hide interaction pop-up. It is again a blueprint implementable event with a category of HUD. Okay, once we've made these, make sure that you have an interact actor variable. We set this up in previous episode where we were doing the interaction based on our proximity to an object, but we can use the same variable. We don't need them to be separate currently, but we probably will want them to be separate if we're working with a two-part system where we have the collision with the player and what they're looking at. They could be different objects, and so we may want to keep track of both of them. In today's episode, we're only going to be using this one, and so you can just set this variable, but just keep that in mind, as it's going to come up again in the future. Going back into the tick function in the FPS store character.cpp, again, I'm setting the interact actor variable to the casted interactable actor here. And then I'm calling our new function trigger interaction pop-up and passing in the interactable actor. You could also pass in the interact actor. Either way is fine here. This needs to be set so that we know what object we're interacting with. This is just for the pop-up, so it doesn't matter which one you pass in. The case is the same for the weapon as well. So again, we're setting this to the interactable actor. We're calling our new function and passing in interactable actor. And these ones are pretty self-explanatory, but now that you've made the function, go ahead and call the hide interaction pop-up after setting the interact actor to null pointer in both of the else statements. At this point, all of our look at logic is set up and in place. We just need to determine what happens in these events when they are called. Since the events were made in the FPS store character.h, if we go to the blueprint for the character, I'm going to go to my base character blueprint, and I'm going to set up both of these events. So I'm going to just search for them. Trigger interaction pop-up. And you select it, and it's going to pop up here. And then we want our hide interaction pop-up, and it will pop up here. Now, what we need to do is determine what type of object it is that we are using and grab different data based on that. Remember, the object reference is just an actor object reference because it might be a base interactable actor, it could be a base weapon, it could be other things like shields or things that we can interact with that aren't just interactable objects. So what we can do is attempt to cast to a base interactable actor or base interactable BP. Either way, I'm typically casting to the BP version so I can get all the data about it. If this cast succeeds, we know that we are of a base interactable actor type. At this point, we want to grab our object name variable that we set up earlier. So in base interactable actor.cpp, the object name is defaulting to object. Of course, for each object, it can be different. But that's the variable we're trying to grab. Take note, if you drag off of this cast and type object name, you will get an object name in utilities here, which is this node. You don't want this. This is the name of the object as Unreal sees it, not our object name variable. The one you're looking for is this. Now, the base character BP is the one that spawns the HUD and sets a HUD reference. So we want to make sure that our HUD reference is valid. and then we can call an appropriate function. To do this, we have our HUD reference variable. We can drag it in, get it, right click on it, and convert it to a validated get. Only if it's valid do we want to call a function on it. Now we had display equip text in here, and so you can call that and pass in the object name to the item name, like I've done here. But when you do this, it will ask you if you want to equip the object. So it's working, right? Press E to equip object, but equip isn't really the right word here. Yes, it works for the blaster, or for the weapons. But do we really want to equip this object? Probably not. We just want to interact with it. So we're going to want to create a new function here. But you can set it up like this for now, just to make sure that it is working as intended. Now, if this cast fails at the very start here, this means that the object reference was not of a base interactable actor type. So instead, we can drag off our object reference and cast the next one, which could be base weapon or base weapon BP. From here, the base weapon class also has a name of the weapon that we just called name. And so that's the variable we will want to use. So we'll want to drag off of this, grab name, get name, and then we're going to use the HUD reference and call display equip text with the name passed in. Once that's done, we can set up our hide interaction pop-up, which is very simple. Our HUD reference has a hide equip text function, which just literally hides that text that we were seeing on the screen. So this displays it, this hides it. Well, we can just use our HUD reference and hide the equip text. It's that simple. If you like, you can always check for validity of the HUD reference as well. Although it's not really necessary that you check for if it's valid here or not. Because if we're calling this, it should have been valid the first time around, but it's an extra check. And technically, it could be invalid by the time this is called, so it might be a good idea to do it like that. Now, one thing to note, this function is being called on tick, and we are just going to continuously display the equip text. If we go to that function in our HUD, this is my character HUD, this is the HUD reference, and we have display equip text and hide equip text. In display equip text, I'm setting the text and I'm setting the visibility. So it's not continuously spawning this text over top of the HUD, but it is calling this all the time. Don't worry, I'm aware of that, and in the next episode, we will get into making it so it's only called one time instead of just spamming the HUD widget with that. Same deal here. Alright, now, what I want to do is update display equip text to change based on if it's interacting or whatever the case may be. The easiest way to do this would be to just duplicate this function and change the text in here. Display or press E to interact. And that will do the trick. However, you could additionally update this function to take in something like an enum, and it could change the text that is printed here. There's a very good chance we may do that. But regardless of what we do, we want to essentially make sure that there's only one piece of text at the same time on the screen. Otherwise, the text will be over top of each other, which would be pretty ugly. So to fix this issue, I'm going to take equip item text here, change it to interaction text. Okay, so I've actually changed the name of this text box here to be interaction text, not equip item text, which will change it in display equip text and hide equip text. Because we're not always going to be equipping, sometimes we're going to be interacting. Then from there, as long as this is the only text box that we're setting text on and hiding text on, we won't have an issue. So the simplest way to get our interaction text working the way we want is to duplicate the display equip text function and rename it to display interaction text. Then we can rename hide equip text to be something like hide interaction and equip text. So hide interaction equip text looks like this. It's the same thing. I just renamed it. We have display equip text, which looks like this. And then we have display interaction text now, which we can change the string, press E to interact. And we'll say interact with a space. Save this, go back into the base character blueprint, and if the type is a base interactable VP but not a base weapon VP, we don't want to call display equip text, we want to call it display interaction text. Then we want to pass in the object name to the item name, and now if we look at a weapon, it'll say press E to equip blaster, but if we look at an object, it'll say press E to interact with object. Perfect. So that problem is solved. Now the last problem we need to address is with the weapons. So if we go into our base weapon BP and go to the viewport, collision with the raycast and the weapon isn't as simple as it was with the base interactable actor. On the weapon, we have something called a pickup collider, and essentially it shows you where we can be, where the character can be in relation to this weapon and still interact with it. So if the character is standing somewhere within this box, we can pick up this weapon. Pretty simple. But now it's a little bit different because we're going to be able to look at it to pick it up. If we click on the pickup collider and scroll down to the collision, previously in the series it was set to overlap all dynamic or overlap all. Either one would have worked. For me, it was set to overlap all dynamic, but regardless of what it was set to, everything was overlap except projectile, which I'm noticing now is set on block. That actually doesn't have to be the case. That can also be overlap. But the important one is the visibility here. So you want to change it from overlap all or overlap all dynamic to custom, which will allow you to change the response to every single channel. The response we care about is the response that we're setting up in our raycast. And the collision channel that we're using for that raycast is the E collision channel visibility. So our visibility collision response here should be blocking because we need to block against that. That way if the raycast comes in contact with this object, there is a blocking result, which will then allow us to go into the be blocking hit if statement. Okay. So this minor change, switching it to custom and just setting block on the visibility channel, will allow us to actually look at the weapon and then do things like interact with it. Now the overlapping with it isn't really going to work anymore. You can see as I look around here, it's taking it on and off. This is because in tick, we are now setting it to have no interact actor and hide the pop-up if these conditions aren't met. This is where I said we'll need another episode to work with both conditions. We'll need to have the overlapping actors as well as the looked at actors because they are or could be different. But ignoring that for now, having set this, we will be able to look at the weapons and now get the appropriate text to pop up on the screen. We can also press E to actually equip them. So now I have two of the same weapon. I can equip the Kingslayer as well and the Blaster. So interaction now fully works by looking at the object and pressing the interact key. Then we drop our other weapons. If you'd like to change the name of your interactable objects, that's also very simple. You can go to the interactable object. So for me, it's in Blueprints, Interactables, Base Interactable. Go to Class Defaults. and you can set the name of the object here. For me, I'm going to delete my display interact prompt in this blueprint, as well as the append and print string that I had in here, because I no longer need them, and we remove the event from the code. So there's nothing in my base interactable BP event graph. Because this is the base class, I'm not actually going to change it from object, but as you have children objects like doors or buttons or levers, you can change the name here. Or you can go as far as to change it on an individual level. So if I am to click on this object in the scene, I can change the object here. I could make it something like test object 1. I can play. And now we are able to press E to interact with test object 1, which of course does nothing currently. But there we go. Now we can look at objects and interact with them in a lot better way than just overlapping with them. But overlapping can still be important. So we're not going to leave that out. We're not going to just ignore it. We're going to be adding it, and we're going to have them working together in the next interaction episode. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for today, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys for all you do. I'm so incredibly grateful, and I really, really am happy that you guys are enjoying this series and showing me all the progress you guys make on your games. It's so fun to watch, and I'm glad you guys are having fun. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It is completely free, and I'd be happy to help you with any issues that you ran into. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.